Thank you. Thank you, Kasturi.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for your valuable speech. Your thought-provoking address has indeed set the platform for the workshop henceforth. Now, may I request the HOD of Department of Economics, Dr. Rafiq Ahmed, sir, to address the gathering on few words about the workshop.
Thank you, Kasturi. A very good morning to one and all present in this virtual meet. Respected Principal, sir, respected Vice Principal, ma'am of Bahona College, respected other dignitaries present here, respected participants from different parts of the country, the coordinators of the workshop, and the organizing team behind. I welcome all the outsiders present here to the Department of Economics, Bahona College, and Economic Study and Research Center as well. At the outset, I would like to focus in short on the Economics Department of Bahona College and its activities. The Department of Economics, along with the Bahona College itself, was established on 15th July 1966 with a general objective to impart higher education in economics in Northeastern Jorhat. Subsequently, with a vision of offering intensive higher education in the field of economics with special emphasis on the orientation of emerging job opportunities and the local socio-economic issues as well. The major or honors course in economics was commenced since the academic year 1974-75. To this date, the department has traversed the years-long offering as major or honors to 47 batches and as core or non-major to 51 batches, and to its credit, apart from teaching economics in higher secondary courses, this department has produced more than 2,000 graduates with economics as honors or major, and many more with economics as core or non-honors subject. The department, to orient the students with local issues, accomplishes some field survey-based project works and seminal presentation, recently striding for publication under the organizational banner of Bahona College Economic Study and Research Center, established in the year 2011. To this date, the center has accomplished more than 100 field surveys and prepared project reports by the students under the guideship of the faculties of the department. It has also got published two research collections, Food Security and Rural Poverty and Sustainable Living in Rural Assam. Over 2015 onwards, the center is publishing annually a research journal with ISSN number Tapun the Mirror, particularly giving opportunities to the advanced learners to disseminate their research capabilities. In addition to all these things, recently the center ventures to step towards the organization of seminar and workshop with the aim to develop research ambient and qualities among the students and the faculties, to which the current one-week workshop on research and academic publication and ethics is the first one. Coming to the part of the workshop, just going to start today, I would like to state that the title itself carries the meaning and significance. The act of research is to dig out the unknown facts and thereby to enrich knowledge for a human cause. Publication in any form is the sole route to disseminate the added knowledge, easing the path of development and further research. These things will happen only if ethics is maintained in research and publication. Those newly coming to the field of publications require to know aspects of content writing, both from the perspectives of publishers and authors. With these goals, the workshop has been framed and also expected that the technical sessions will focus on the related areas and issues meeting requirements of the participants. The expectation of the workshop has come to reality through your participation along with the consent of the resource persons and the effort of the organizing team. So I offer my deep gratitude and heartfelt thanks to all of you, especially to Nandana Datta, Professor of Department of English, Gauhati University, for going to enlighten this inaugural session. I also gratefully thank the officials of Jorhat Development Authority for sponsoring the workshop. With these few words, I would like to conclude my speech. Thank you. Thank you all. Over to Kasturi.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for highlighting the importance of the workshop and also about the activities and works of the Research Center and the Department of Economics. Now, moving on, I would like to request Dr. Pankaj Bora, Coordinator IQAC, to share his thoughts about the workshop. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Goswami, Honorable Principal, sir, and the dignitaries present here. At the very onset, I would like to welcome you all to this 7-day-long program. As Principal, sir, and Rafiq has already stated that the core objective of this workshop is to impart knowledge related to research and publication ethics. And I hope all will be benefited from the 14 sessions that we are organizing in next 7 days. I believe that this workshop will have tangible and intangible outcomes. In future, we're planning to bring out textbooks, we're planning to bring out research books, we are planning to publish journals, and I believe that this workshop will help everyone in publishing their quality articles. We have ensured quality in every aspect while organizing this workshop. We have decided to develop a certificate where we will provide you certificates where you can share, where we will integrate QR code. By scanning that QR code, you can access the contents that are discussed in this workshop. Your participation and all the information will be available in that certificate. And in other way, this workshop will also help you in improving your research quality. So in every aspects, we are trying to organizing a quality workshop, and I hope everyone will be benefited from this. At the end, I hope everyone will actively participate in the workshop and will learn a lot. With these words, I would like to conclude. Thank you. Happy learning.
Thank you, Pankaj sir, for enlightening the workshop and also for your constant guidance and support. Before I move on, a humble request to the audience and the participants, you kindly switch off your mics, and if you have any questions or comments, you can post it in the chat box, or you can ask our guest of honor today once she has delivered her address. Now, moving on to the highlight of today's inaugural session, it's my immense privilege to introduce Professor Nandana Datta ma'am from Department of English, Gauhati University. Ma'am has a vast and versatile experience in the field of teaching and research. She specializes in American studies, post-colonial literary theory, narratology, and women's studies. Currently, she is heading also the Gauhati University Institute of Northeast India Studies as the director. In her career spreading over decades, ma'am has published journals, articles of importance, and also authored a few books and book chapters. This is just a short introduction to her career, but ma'am has more to offer. So I would like to humbly request you, ma'am, to address the audience. Over to you, Nandana ma'am.
Thank you, Kasturi. I'm going to switch on my, I have my video on very briefly, and then I'm going to switch it off while I go on when I start speaking on the topic of today. So thank you very much. And I'm very honored that the principal of the college, the IQAC coordinator, and the head of the Department of Economics, as well as the organizers, saw fit to invite me to this lecture and to the workshop, sorry. And though I'm not going to be part of your workshop, I noticed that many of the areas that are fundamental to questions of ethics in research and publication have been covered there. So I will probably be talking in more general terms about what constitutes ethics in research, ethics in practicing of disciplines, and possibly they will not be directly addressing the issues that you have listed, which will obviously be taken up by other people. So I am going to switch off the video, and I will start talking about what constitutes ethics. So I have a number of questions with which I want to begin. I'll take them up as we go on. The first question is, of course, what is ethics in the practice of a discipline? What does it mean? Secondly, to get to this point, from what issues do ethical concerns arise? I think these are fundamental to all disciplines, whether they are science disciplines or humanities or social science disciplines. I primarily work in the humanities, but with interdisciplinary work becoming so important these days, I take interest in what is happening in the social science disciplines as well. So some of these questions arise from my interest in these areas. To get so what issues what kind of ethical concerns arise within a discipline? And here I think we need to address a very important fundamental issue, which is that of epistemology, or the theory of knowledge, where you have three basic questions: who studies, what is studied, and how it is studied. You'll find that ethical issues that we discuss about responsibility, conflict of interest, confidentiality, anonymity, all of these things are informed consent. There's so many other very important issues. These all have to do with epistemological foundations. So all disciplines have this. We ask these questions. Different people are asking them. Our objects of study differ, and how we study that object, what are the methodologies of each discipline, these vary. But these three questions are fundamental in any study of knowledge, whatever that domain of knowledge may be. So I want to put this on board, that these three basic questions must be kept in mind while practicing a discipline. As you notice, I'm not straight away talking about research publication and ethics, because I think it's important to first understand ethics within a discipline, within the practice of a discipline first, and then go on to what will come after that. How do you communicate knowledge? How do you deal with others with whom you work, and so on? So the first question, what is ethics in the practice of a discipline? Secondly, these three fundamental issues, and these are linked. I'm linking these questions that I've listed for myself. Number three, linked to these three questions, ethics itself is a relationship between self and other. When we talk about ethics in general, in philosophy, for example, we are talking about ethics as, at least the way I read it, it is a relationship between self and other. How I, as a person, deal with another. What kind of behavior do I have to that person? What kind of attitude do I have? What relationship do I have to that other? And that other, when you stretch it and use it within the discipline, can actually become the object of study. So this question then of self and other may be discerned as that of the researcher and the subject that is being researched, the seer and the seen, the person who conducts the experiment, and the object on which an experiment is conducted, the field of study that is being taken up. All of these are caught within that basic dyad of self and other. Fourthly, ethical practice is unique in each discipline, determined by the nature of the object of study. So from general issues, we are moving on to particular issues within disciplines, what we study in disciplines. And this came to my mind very strongly some years back when I had to write something on ethics in the humanities. And I discovered that there is very little work on ethics in the humanities, particularly disciplines like literature, history, the arts, because you don't know what exactly is the object of study there. If a book is an object of study, what is my ethical relationship to that book? See, so that's a very complicated question, which is why I also ask this, that ethical practice is unique to each discipline. The issues evolved out of biomedical ethics cannot always translate immediately into questions of ethics within a subject like literature or history, or even the subjects that many of you practice. So ethical practice is unique in each discipline, determined by the nature of the object of study, and above all, the culture of that discipline and its historical development. This fourth point, let me pause a while here. When I say that the culture of that discipline and its historical development, you'll notice that unless you know how a discipline has developed, what has it studied over the years, where did it originate, how did it originate, who or what did they study, did that discipline study, and what were the urgencies which brought about the emergence of a particular discipline. I think if we know these things, ethical issues will become much clearer, much easier to take on board and practice without having to actually mechanically consult some textbook or handbook all the time. So the first point I'm making with all of these is that it's firstly important to learn what academic ethics might mean and what ethical practice of a discipline might mean for each one of us within different disciplines. So above all, therefore, the culture of that discipline. How does it work? What do we do within a discipline? I sit and read a book. Is there an ethical issue at work there? I mean, these are the questions one has to ask. So I'll come back to these in brief later on and maybe during the question hour. The fifth question or fifth issue, to make oneself acquainted with one's discipline, therefore, its history and character, what it has studied, what it studies now, and changes that are determined by the place and time in which it functions. In your introduction to the Department of Economics and the work that it is doing, your head of the department mentioned that there's a lot of work that has been done in the Northeast, in Assam, in the place you're working in or the place where you're functioning. I think this is very important because the ethics that applies to a Western country or a Western university in the West will not be the same as the issues that might be relevant for us here. The degrees of literacy might be important when you're talking about informed consent, for example. When you take a questionnaire or you want someone to sign a consent form, that person who you're going to interview or study may be illiterate, may not be able to read those questions or even understand those questions. So that variation, that need to factor in the differences that are there within the areas of study, within the region, the place, the location in which research is conducted is very, very important. The other corresponding or connected thing here is, of course, the time in which research is conducted. You see, when we tell our students that go and do a review of literature, there is an ethical point there as well. Why do we ask them to review literature? We don't want to replicate or do the same kind of work that has been done elsewhere. Why not? Why does it matter? Because you see, a discipline's work or the honest practice of a discipline means that you acquaint yourself with the work that has been done and go forward from there. If you're going to backtrack and go back to what has already been done, reinvent the wheel once again, I think you're not really doing your duty to the discipline. So there's a question of responsibility to the discipline as well. Therefore, the changes that are determined by the place and time in which a discipline functions, these are also important to take on board. The sixth point I raise is that the spirit of ethical thinking and conduct should therefore become second nature. Learning, practicing, making a habit of it. I'll give you one example. When we start with our research scholars, we tell them that when they go out and write or copy something from or cut and paste something from another essay or a book or somewhere, immediately write down the page number and the full reference details. Sometimes there was talk of plagiarism in one of your sessions, I think there will be. So when you think about plagiarism, it's not always intended plagiarism. It's often also because of the lack of a habit of regular referencing, which is very, very important. It should be second nature that the moment you take down something from some other text or some other critic, you reference it. Who has said it? When was it said? That when is very important. You don't want to present old work as something that was done in the 2020s or something very recent. You don't want to make that mistake. That itself can become an unethical practice if you are going to, pretend that you're doing something new or you're just doing something that has been done just now and you're taking on from there. So that aspect of review actually also inheres a certain ethical practice. So training in ethical work, and I thought that this is something that is so important that you all are doing, that you have a body which is a sort of systematically conducting research and work here in your college. Because I think it's very important that this is put on board. Nowadays, you'll see that with PhD coursework and all, we do have a mandatory ethics paper, short ethics course that is taught. But it's not enough to do that. I think there has to be a culture of ethical practice that you share with everyone else. One person doing ethical things by himself or herself will not make any difference. But when we share in the knowledge, we agree that it is important to reference, it is important to work like this or that, that becomes something that will be much easier to practice, much easier to go on with. So the tools, practices, methods that enable ethical conduct, these have to be taught. What kinds of methodologies are you using? What kind of research are you doing? What kind of questionnaires, or what kind of field work? What kind of focus group discussions? Who are these people? Training in these areas is very, very important. So ethics in research, and then in the communication of research, therefore becomes the next stage. So before you do all this, I think the first thing is to get your grounding in the discipline which you are practicing, to know everything about that discipline, what is happening in it worldwide. And the international dimension of research today has become so important. All these ethical questions are so important because you are not doing your work only here. You have to keep in view what is happening in different parts of the world where similar work is being done. So some basic questions have arisen out of these things, which have to do with just one thing. Now, respect. So all these are known things to you. So I'll just quickly run through them. Respect, or treating others with attention, esteem, and consideration. Responsibility, needing to be accountable and following through on obligations, promises, and commitments. Integrity, following high standard of honesty, justice, and fairness. Competence, having the skills and knowledge that makes a person qualified to work in their particular profession. And fifth, concern, what is our ethical responsibility to those who have less than we do. So I think these more or less cover, and these are from handbooks that are prevailing all over the world in various universities. You'll find that these 5 or 6 areas are mentioned by all of them. So respect, responsibility, integrity, competence, concern. Competence. After we've looked at respect, responsibility, integrity, we believe these are known things within ethical practice. Why is the question of competence important here? Suppose you ask me to talk on something that I know nothing about. Ethical practice, okay, I've done a little bit of work in the area. But if you had asked me to talk on something that I know nothing about, and I agree to talk on it, okay, and I cut paste things from somewhere and I deliver something to you, that would be a very, very dishonest kind of method and dishonest approach on my part, and a lack of attention, lack of respect for you as members of an audience who are listening to me. So you are expecting me to talk about something that I know, not about some things that I don't know, right? I think that is a very important ethical issue at work there. If you had asked me to talk on something else, I ideally should refuse. So these 5 areas are very, very important to keep in mind. And I think we should go with them as we go along during the rest of my, whatever I say today. I think we should keep them in view as we move on from here. So the other areas that I want to put on board, and which I might, if we have the time, I don't know, I always run out of time, so I hope I'll have the time to touch on them. They are connected areas, the new areas that are emerging. Why have ethical concerns become so important today? If you look at the kind of areas that are emerging, the increasing move towards multi and interdisciplinary research, the fact that we are working with other people, with other disciplines, this is a very, very important aspect of why ethics has become such an important issue. So the new areas, interdisciplinary work, place and time awareness, these are things that I would also add to the 5 or 6 issues that I have put on board for you here. I want to give you a number of examples, but one example I would like to start with, and it's a favorite example. If there are any of my students in the audience, you might even remember me telling you about this. Several years back, many years back, in fact, there was this book by Donna Haraway called Primate Visions. It was about the study of the great apes, primates. And she had said something very important in this book. Haraway is a very important person in the ethical thinking on research and ethics even today. I think there was a 2021 article which took note of her work and the significance of her work for us even today. So Haraway had said there, giving an example for primate research, that when the great apes were studied, some of the important scientists who did this study were women. One of the names there was that of Jane Goodall. As children, we used to know about Jane Goodall in the African, savannas and all, studying the great apes in Kenya. I think she did much of her work in Kenya. So she was studying the great apes. And there is a picture of her where you find that Goodall is sitting exposed to all the animals around her on a little mound. She's surrounded by several of the great apes. I think it was the chimpanzee she was studying. There's one, a mother, and a little baby. Okay? And several other apes are surrounding her. So the point of that picture was very important. For years and years, when we talk about the scientific revolution and it's the development of scientific research and so on, we also think about the lab and the fact that we bring something that we want to study into the lab and put it under a microscope and study it. Okay? In other words, we bring it into a place which is convenient for us as researchers. We don't go out into the domain of the object or into the realm of the object and study it in conditions which are convenient for the object of study rather than for the subject which is doing the study. So that example was stunning and it has stayed in my head after all these years. I still remember this because what you will see happening there is that Goodall was willing to be uncomfortable, willing to endanger herself by coming and studying ape behavior, the great ape behavior, in their territory. At risk to herself because the mother ape would have been nervous at the presence of another or a strange person or a strange creature. Right? So Haraway is making this very important point, and Haraway's work has been so significant because of this. What she raised here is that where do you place yourself as a researcher when you're studying the object you have opted to study? When you're doing field work, when you're doing work on domestic violence, when you want to go and interview people, young children, mentally affected people, or victims of some violent incident. And you see so many examples of this on television when the newspaperman or the journalist goes and asks sometimes extremely inconvenient and extremely insensitive questions to people who have just experienced some violent incident. So when you look at that, I think it's significant to see what did Haraway actually mean when she brought up examples of this kind and talked about the primate research, behavioral primate research, where you're studying the primate in its own surroundings. So some of the questions that have come up out of what has been called the ethical project of Donna Haraway are how to coexist in a world characterized by heterogeneous elements. I cannot therefore, and see these are questions which you will see emerge with each discipline. I don't want to list them like that. They will emerge as they come. How to coexist in a world characterized by heterogeneous elements. Everybody is different, right? So how do you study every one of these diverse elements, every one of these diverse creatures and objects? Secondly, within Haraway's project again, there are three major things that she raised. How to live with complex objects, with advanced technologies, with cyborgs, with companion species. So we are going on talking about human rights and the rights of the human, rights of children, rights of people, and so on. But when you're looking at how, and that's why I said place and time is so important, what is happening in each of the disciplines. Every discipline today, I think, is aware of a number of huge areas that are being studied globally. Climate change, one of them. Migration, the second one. Migration is not just migration of people, it is of species, it is of infections, it is of so many things that move from one part of the world to another. So when you look at something like this, I think it's also important to take into account that you have to be able to learn how to live with these complexities, the complex objects, with advanced technologies, with cyborgs, with companion species, and so on. Those are her areas of work. And the third point she raised within what is called the ethical project is how to build a common world where these conditions can be met. So how do we work, research, produce knowledge within these very diverse and complex conditions? So her approach to knowledge, therefore, has been as situated practice. That is, practice it where you are, where the object is. You have to study it there. That's one. And the attention to the stories of others. I found this extremely interesting because, as a person from literature, stories are so important. When you listen to someone telling stories, you'll find that you're hearing more than what you might be able to do if you just get a sort of schematic idea of what is wrong or what is right at that point of time. Say you're interviewing people in a refugee camp or a camp that has been set up for flood relief. You can go and observe the conditions and write about them. You can have brief interviews with people, or you can create conditions. And I'm making a distinction between asking questions and photographing and putting them on the television screen, and sitting down there with these people, spending time with them, and giving them the opportunity to speak in their own voices. So this is the other thing that Haraway raises, the attention to the stories of others. What do others have to say? How do they say them? Why do they say them the way they do? So I'm therefore flagging another set of issues that when we are doing ethical research, we are responsive, responsible. In Haraway studies, you'll find that the word used is responsibility, the ability to respond, not responsibility, but a combination word, which is responsibility. So the ability to respond, to listen, to attend, to be sympathetic, to empathize, to identify with. These are things that we learn when we do ethical practice in any form of research. So to identify yourself doesn't mean that you set aside your critical abilities, but to identify yourself means that you understand from where that person is coming, what that person is saying, why is he or she saying the kind of things that she is saying, or why does an animal behave in a particular way? Why does a river overflow its banks? See, we are studying everything, isn't it? Eco-critical research, I think, would also urge us to take note of how do plants and animals behave. What is the character of plants, animals, and other forms, life forms around us? So these are some of the basic issues that are there. I just want to now go back to some things that I wrote down and that I would like to come back to after flagging these areas, and you can always come back and ask me questions if you want to on those. So ethical issues in research therefore have their origin in the fundamental features of each discipline. They arise from the epistemological grid of knower, known, and mode of knowing, which I've already said, the person or subject who conducts the research, the person or object on whom it is conducted, and the methods used in conducting it. A relationship is set up between the subject and the object by the processes of research, and it is in this interaction that questions of ethics arise. These are in the domain of rights of the object of research to take part or withdraw from a research program, to privacy, confidentiality, and anonymity, to not be violated in any way, to have rights over the results of research, clarity over degree of participation in research design, questions of informed consent and of inducements, comfort with the nature of interviews and interactions, and the attention to differences of culture, gender, ethnicity, religion, life form between the knower and the known. Okay, so I'll take up two things from here. One is the question of rights being violated of the objects of research. Take two examples which are very well known in ethical studies and the work on ethics that you'll find in journals like Research Integrity and Peer Review and so on. These are two incidents that happened in the 20th century. One was, of course, the Holocaust, the Nazi experiments, the eugenic experiments conducted on the Jewish people in order to establish racial superiority. So huge violations, as you all know, it's such a well-known incident in fairly recent history. So that's a very well-known incident, and the Nuremberg Code of Ethics emerged from there of how to behave, how to act with people. So there were lots of trials conducted and so on. The Nuremberg Code runs to some 49 volumes. So you can imagine how seriously this was perceived. This is one example. The other one was something that happened in the United States in, I forget the date now. This was known as the Tuskegee Experiment on syphilis or sexually transmitted disease. They conducted their study objects were Black men who were studied over a long period of time for how they reacted to infection, syphilis infection. No treatment was given, and these people were under the impression that they were being studied in order to be cured. Nothing was told to them about the prospects, the project itself, what would happen at the end. 128 of them died as a result of being left untreated while the study was going on. So these are some of the scandalous violations that have taken place in huge research projects. But you'll also find that we are looking at questions of informed consent and of inducements. You might pay someone in order to get illicit information from a certain site or from a group of people. You might be able to pay someone and get that person to convince, threaten, or in some way persuade people to come and be part of a research project. So the question of consent and of inducements becomes very important. Comfort with the nature of interviews and interactions. When feminist studies really took off in the mid-20th century, one of the areas that began to develop, and sometime around the 80s and 90s, a number of very important books on feminist research came out. One of the things that was very interesting there was the use of particular kinds of feminist interviews. What is a feminist interview? Or an interview that is aware of the gender of the person with whom it is being done. So the interviewer, the kind of interview that was there was a loose, nowadays I think you all use these loosely structured interviews. But at that point of time, the issue raised there was very new. And the point raised was that you have to take the interview in the interviewee's time and convenience. Suppose, again, domestic violence is such an important area of study all over the world. Suppose you want to study domestic violence in the city or in a particular place you have identified. The researcher can go take a certain questionnaire and go and give it to the people who have been victims, to the victims of domestic violence. The victims may or may not fill up that form and give it back to you. Very often we get questionnaires by mail with a request, please fill up the questionnaire and send it back. We frequently do not respond to such requests, mainly because you don't know who is asking, you don't know what is the point of the study, you're just being asked to fill a questionnaire and give it. So this kind of thing, when you see that the victim of domestic violence may or may not fill up the form. So what does the researcher do? The next stage might be to go and meet the people. You meet the people and the man or woman, there have been men who have been victims of violence as well. So whoever you're studying, that person might not be comfortable answering your questions in his or her house. Okay? He or she might hesitate to communicate to you things that have been humiliating, offensive, things that she doesn't want to talk about. She may not want to talk about. So what does a researcher then do? This feminist research suggestions came in like this, that if you have cases where things like this happen, then one is that you take your time. It's not like I have 3 months to finish my interviews and I will do all my interviews in that period and end of the matter. No, you have to give yourself that time within which the person can achieve a degree of comfort level with the researcher. All of this happens nowadays. I'm merely saying this, that this is part of the history of how it has come about. So you find that you go to the person, she says, no, today I don't want to talk. So tomorrow, maybe you take her out, maybe you go somewhere else, you tell her your stories, or you tell her stories of other people you know who have, you do things which make that person feel comfortable. That degree of comfort means that you have managed to adapt your interview and questions, keeping in mind empathy, the person's state of mind, identifying with the person, sympathy and empathy, two different kinds of things. Sympathy and empathy both. You use all of this and your process of research becomes different. So you might get information which you would otherwise not get if you were more impersonal with the interview, or if your mode of conducting the interview was hurried, was not sufficiently sensitive to the person with whom you're dealing with. So if you're studying 15 people, let us say, all 15 might require 15 different kinds of approaches. So you see, when we are talking about ethical practices, we are also looking at a great deal of labor, a great deal of attention, a great deal of work. It's not simple. There are no shortcuts here. One has to really put oneself on the board, as it were, in order to get the results that you know, not the results that you expect, but the results that you wish to get or you want to hear from the object you're studying. So therefore, these questions then become very important. Privacy, confidentiality, these you'll be doing, and saw the list, you'll be studying all of these. A final thing, that is the attention to differences of culture, gender, ethnicity, and religion between the knower and the known. Very important, because you will have to inform yourself about that other person, the culture, and everything else about that person, the ethnicity, and then proceed. Not just go and ask questions without concern to the kind of sensitivities that might be there between the two of you. The second issue that comes in as part of my introductory, these things that I'm trying to say here, is that institutionally there would be the requirement of getting permission to conduct research. You probably have an institutional board of ethics working within your institution. We have one at the university, especially when human respondents are involved. So mostly these are human respondents, but you'll see that in research in the life sciences, for example, you also have to get certificates to see what kind of animals are being studied, whether they are being ethically treated, and so on. From institutional ethics committees, so you need a kind of sanction from institutional ethics committees, and responsibility towards funding agencies, especially with regard to the proper and transparent utilization of funds. So the first set of questions that I raised, and right at the start I also flagged, had to do with the person or the researcher who is training herself, learning how to do it, understanding certain things. So it has to do with the researcher herself or himself. The next set of questions are slightly directed externally, because you're talking about funding agencies, you're talking about institutional ethics committees, you're talking about external pressures that are put in order to ensure certain kinds of practices. So you have to go with the form of the ethics committee. If you're doing something that is not stated in the ethics committee form, then maybe you have to go and consult someone, your supervisor or the ethics committee itself, and there'll be discussions on how to proceed. With regard to funding agencies, especially with regard to proper and transparent utilization of funds, but also other kinds of pressures might come in. You might want to tailor your research to suit the funding agency. You might want to do the kind of research, and we do this, isn't it? We do research that will get funding. What happens there? Are you doing the most urgent research? I have no answer to this question, because we also have done projects where we are doing the project that is likely to get funding, not the project that needs to be done, right? So if you're doing that, are you being ethical? I would leave that to the individual researcher to address, because that's a question that nobody from outside can address for you. You have to decide what is the research you're going to do, what kind of funding you will get for what you want to do. Is it therefore the right funding agency you have gone to? If you are wanting to do a certain kind of research, then the funding agency will not fund that particular kind of research. And I'm not talking about a body of work, but the kind of work. The kind of work. The third point is the communication of research. So you've done your research, you get everything. The communication of research involves another set of ethical issues, most of which are stated by journals themselves. So you communicate your research to journals or to chapters and books, mostly to journals, but which are also possible to extract from the international guidelines for publication, like the COPE, or Committee for Publication Ethics. I think there'll be people talking on all that, and from journals that regularly discuss such matters. 3 journals I have found particularly useful are Research Integrity and Peer Review, Journal of Academic Ethics, and Research Ethics. So many of the current debates on ethics are going on in these journals. And if you're interested, you should be taking a regular look at them. They are free access. Most of the articles are free access, so you can read them easily. These include, so the communication of research will raise certain issues. These include plagiarism and wrongful attribution. We'll be doing all that during the workshop. Falsification and misrepresentation of data, improper and inconsistent referencing, multiple submissions of the same paper, and fudging of the roles of the contributors in the case of joint papers. Here we have a certain really controversial area, because in disciplines like mine, humanities disciplines, when I write a paper on literature, or when one of my scholars writes a paper, I am there to offer advice. I'm there for them to use as a sounding board, but I'm not actually writing the paper with him or her. So I hesitate to lend my name or to share in the credit for that paper. The scholar might acknowledge me. He might, and I think they should acknowledge that I wrote this much for reading the paper and so on and so forth. They can write all that as a little note. But to present it as a joint paper, I think there is a problem there, because I don't have any clear demarcation of the kind of work that I may have done. The scholar will come at various stages and discuss, can I use this idea? Do you think this part of the argument is correct? So we are doing work all over the place, but I have not participated in the conception, maybe in the actual writing. So I would hesitate to take credit for a paper which the scholar is writing. I would rather have it written in his or her own name. Now, this will be different in different disciplines, because, say, in the social science disciplines, you actually do field work together. You can actually demarcate that this much work has been done by so-and-so, this much has been done by so-and-so, right? And in the science disciplines, of course, this is much easier to demarcate. So these questions then, multiple submissions, or fudging of the roles of contributors in the case of joint papers. Publication ethics do not just refer to the author, but also to the publisher, the editor, and the peer reviewers. So there are ethical issues involved at all of these levels. Additionally, all standard journals carry a clear statement regarding ethical practices, and contributors are expected to adhere to these norms. While ethics itself is a philosophical issue, studied as a distinct element of philosophy, and there are many volumes of ethics, deals with moral conduct and is found in disciplines like literature, performing arts, etc., in the context of human behavior towards one another and with regard to oneself. Its practical application in research has originally come from the biomedical and life sciences and prevailing in the social sciences, but is very vague in the humanities disciplines. We are still not sure. I've been thinking about this area for such a long time. I'm still not sure exactly what constitutes ethical practice, or which one of these and how they would be written without abstractions. I can talk about them abstractly. I can talk about responsibility, attention, listening, etc., in very abstract terms with regard to the book I'm studying, the author who I do not meet. So I have these, intangible entities that I'm dealing with. The institutional concern with ethics in humanities research is relatively new. So we don't have much in humanities research. And just to put on board a little bit about humanities research, because there might be some people here from the humanities, there are a number of guidelines which are available. There's the Norwegian National Committee for Research Ethics in the Social Science and Humanities, known as the NESH guidelines, NESH. Guidelines for Research Ethics in the Social Sciences, Law and the Humanities in 1993. The European Union Code of Ethics for Socio-Economic Research, which is part of the RESPECT project, and the European Commission's Guidance Note for Researchers and Evaluators of Social Science and Humanities Research. So these are some of the bodies and some of the work that has been happening, mostly in the European countries. Very formalized, very systematic guidelines and handbooks are available on all of these. They are all available online. There is also, for humanities and social science disciplines, the Satori guidelines. The Satori is this is called, I always forget the acronym. The Satori guidelines are also available. Please look at them. Institutional ethics committees very often reflect some of these things that are found in the Satori guidelines. Now, the next point I want to bring before you is that of, so the general questions, let's get these out of the way. So what are the broad questions with which we begin research? Assumptions that research involves something new, a relook into old areas. And you can see that I'm coming from the humanities, and therefore I'm raising questions which are perhaps not all that relevant or all that important for you, or have not been important. Please bear with me, because I'm fairly worked up about this idea that we have certain assumptions that involve a look at new areas. So we talk about innovation. All these documents talk about innovation. Humanities researchers wonder, what does innovation mean in literature, in history, in arts and performance studies, fine arts, the creative arts, in all of them? What does innovation mean? Is it a new idea? Is it, because with innovation, you'll find that the question of impact is very often tagged. So when I innovate something, I have a new idea. What is the impact of that idea? The impact of humanities ideas very often are felt maybe 20 years after the idea has come out. It might be felt across disciplines, but it will not be felt right away. By contrast, if you see something like cancer research, the effects are felt immediately. Right now, there has been some time back, I think about a month back, there was this research that a new drug has been found for cancer, and tumors have disappeared and so on. So the direct impact is there. That brings me to another point, and I should have said it earlier when I was talking about research in communicating research. Some journals you'll find, and we find this in many interviews and so on that we go to, people come with journals which come out of a group, a number of journals with massive impact factors. I won't name any of them. I'm sure you're familiar with them. They publish all kinds of articles from all disciplines. Many articles are published in each issue. Most of them are online, and most of them give a certificate and take a fee. They also have impact factors like 4 point something, 6 point something, 7 point something. These are huge impact factors. So how are impact factors calculated? And these are things you will study during the workshop. But the point that these journals have impact factors of such high numbers, what it means is that there is citation and referencing within the journals that are promoted by the same organization. So it might have 10 journals in different areas: engineering, humanities, life sciences, all sorts of journals coming out of the same consortium. So all of those citing one another, you can calculate an impact factor from there. So I would set it aside. You can discuss it during your workshop. So assumptions that research involves a look at new ideas. So when will an idea be cited? When will it be, we have, in the humanities, we have low citation figures. Why do you have low citation figures? I found a paper of mine was cited some 5 years after it was published. One, of course, is accessibility, but the second thing is also that maybe that idea was not useful for anyone. No one was interested in it at that point of time. Later, it became interesting, so they went back and read and brought it back and referred and so on. So this can happen with humanities disciplines. It might also happen with social science disciplines. The idea of innovation, which is discussed in most of the reports and studies that have dealt with ethical research, is central but is likely to look different in different disciplines. The Satori project talks about innovation, as do other statements. And what do they say? The AHRC, this is something from the UK, it's a committee that looks at research ethics in the UK, mentions government, universities, third sector organizations, entrepreneurs, businesses, and consumers who are likely to use certain kinds of research, and therefore innovation and impact becomes important there. The involvement of all these diverse organizations and individuals means that ethical issues are also likely to be different in each case, as the roles and place of each determines what are the most crucial concerns. So who are using the knowledge? Where is the knowledge coming from? Is it being funded by a business house? So all these will decide how that research is received in the society, how it is seen. For the humanities, the contribution of actors like these could be quite unique. The questions that funding agencies and host institutions ask are usually about the relevance of the work. You see, we also filled up forms like this when we were applying for projects here and there. I stopped applying for projects, but when we applied at one point of time, we had to put in things like this: the relevance of the work. There's no direct social relevance of these kinds of work. Relevance of the work, who would be its beneficiaries, what would be the larger social and cultural impact of such work, and the host institution might be concerned that the researcher work within its stated vision and goals. The responsibility of the researcher is to these bodies as well as to the wider research community of the discipline. As he or she takes on board institutional and funding expectations, she would also have to keep in view the state of research within the discipline, methodologies specific to it, as well as new approaches that are generated by the area identified for study. Responsibilities also towards the target area of research, and with each humanities disciplines would be determined by its distinctive objects of study. So this would apply for other things as well. I noticed that it's already 11. So let me go on to what I think, and in my reading of research in the research and ethics, I feel is an important issue, and I'll probably end from there and take questions, is what is called the ethical turn in theory. Why did and how did the question of ethics become so important? And when did it come? See, we have only, it's been about just 2 or 3 years. I think we went through this for just 2 or 3 years when the UGC insisted that we make research ethics a mandatory part of the PhD coursework. So we have a short paper on research ethics sent by the UGC. We do not make this paper. It is sent by the UGC. The UGC also created a handbook to support this course. But the question of ethics in all disciplines was not so common until what we call the ethical turn happened in the 1990s. How did this happen? And this is something I bring from my discipline. I want to share with you. While the concern with ethical response to human objects of research has been with us from the beginnings of scientific research, the situation in the humanities is of more recent origin. One might say that we've always dealt with ethical questions, but have never thought of it as having to be separately addressed. We talk about when we're in literature, when we are discussing character, when we are discussing behavior of characters, we talk about models and was it right, was it correct? When we are asking such questions, we are in fact implicitly asking or dealing with ethics. But how did this question become a larger question of the discipline? The turn from the textualist focus of theory to a more politically and socially committed approach. So there was a time within our disciplines when we only looked at texts, literary texts. We said, okay, in the early years of the 20th century, particularly this happened. Let us not look at what the author did, what he thought, what he might have thought, what the time was. Let's forget about all this and let's just look at the literary text. Many of you may have in school encountered a question, write a critical appreciation of a poem, even in English courses in colleges. Where did that come from? This has its origin in this, that we are not concerned with the time, place, person, etc. We are only looking at the text. Now this changed. This shift happened sometime in 1987. In 1987, what was discovered was that one of the philosophers of ethics, Heidegger, was found to have had connections with the Nazis during the 1930s. And there was another theorist who has been very important within literary theory and theory in general, Paul Deman, who wrote pro and Semitic writings. The anti-Semitic writing, came to light, throwing into doubt the basis of textualist criticism that chose to be blind to these disturbing elements in the high priests of theory. So we started, then the shift happened that who's this person? Who's writing? What is he saying? Why is he saying this? What is the politics of that period and so on? So the whole field of study opened up and we began to allow questions which were external to the literary text to enter. Now, if you look at how disciplines have developed, you will see that we are very sensitive to what is going on around them. What are the important areas of research developing around us? These are things that we think should be taken on board when we are looking at all this. Some critics would suggest the ethical turn may in fact be seen to have begun in response to fields like philosophy, literature, and history after these I mentioned two of these events of the 20th century, the Holocaust, but many other things that happened during the 20th century. Atrocities, treatment of prisoners, the Guantanamo Bay incidents, all of these things that we know happening in the world today, the colonialism, the way colonizing countries treated their colonies, the people in the colonies, the deprivations, the various kinds of oppressions, all of these that have happened in the world in the 20th century, when all of this began to be studied, you'll find that ethical questions became more and more important. Philosophers like Emmanuel Levinas started to be studied. So all these became part of what we did, opening up from individual disciplines and taking on board all these other knowledge from all these other disciplines. So some critics would suggest that with a very important essay which an Indian theorist of theory had written, Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, she had written, Can the Subaltern Speak? Many of you might know this essay. It has nothing to do with literature. She was studying deprived people, women, and she was studying Mahashweta Devi's works. She was studying people in the poor areas where she had opened a number of schools and so on in Bengal, in the rural Bengal. So she asked this question. Can the subaltern speak? Who is the subaltern? The deprived, the poor, the marginalized, the person who doesn't have anything. That person. Can he or she speak? It examined this, the question she raised, it helped disciplines to examine the accessibility of the marginalized to power. When you do study the market, when you're looking at economics, when you're looking at politics, you will see that we are constantly addressing the marginalized, the have-nots, the underprivileged, the people who work and do not earn very little. So all of these. So the accessibility of the marginalized to power, a political and ethical dimension was introduced as a result of this question. And this has been one of the most important directions of critical thinking from the late 20th century onwards. So issues of power, discourse, ideology, otherness, marginality, which we use in all disciplines. And here I think all of you will agree with me. In all your disciplines, you use either the word or the concept. All have an inherent and implied ethical dimension. The persistence of ethical interests are eloquently summed up in the following from a recent critic who wrote about this, that questions tackled by authors from Plato and Aristotle through Ficino, Kant, and Nietzsche, where original ethical issues were discussed, to Sartre, Adorno, and Levinas, such as that of the good life in a particular community. Please note that these are questions which affect all disciplines. The good life in a particular community, self-improvement and moral perfection, of duty and responsibility to the other and to myself, of just and upright speech and action, of truth and lying, of the moral significance of the arts, of the relationship between speech, ethos, and value, of the very meaning of literature, continue to resound in the symphony of contemporary buzzwords and topics which are vague and slippery, like call of the other, answerability, ethical responsibility, openness, obligation, event, doing justice, witnessing, hospitality, singularity, particularity, or the gift. So it's good to keep some of these basic ethical issues in mind when you get down to addressing the kind of questions that you will address during the workshop. And each one of these will take you back to what does ethics mean fundamentally. And I want to end by reminding you with what I said at the beginning, that it's useful to keep in mind, firstly, what are the epistemological questions? Who speaks or who is doing the research? What is being researched or studied? And what is the method being applied in order to study that object? There you will find that in the method, in the person, in his or her attitude, and in the object and the relationship that the object has to the person who's doing the research. In all of these, all those ethical issues, listening, attention, responsibility, conflict of interest, everything will be embedded. And the connected issue that I raised, that fundamentally, when we are doing a discipline, we are really working with a dimension of the self and the other. I'm the person doing the studying and I'm studying something. So that self-other relationship can be expanded to include others of all kinds, whether they are human subjects, whether they are animals, whether they are the environment, whether they are, whether it's a literary text or an author of a literary text. So responsibility, attention, listening are fundamental issues that we apply in studying and research. And it's from there that the questions that come up about plagiarism, etc., these questions really emerge from learning to do your discipline with integrity and responsibility. Thank you so much. If there are questions, I will take them. I think I've taken more than the time I should have. So 1 hour. Yes.
Thank you, Nandana ma'am. No, you have not taken more than 1 hour. If you could have continued, but
okay. So any other things that come up, I can take them up as part of questions if there are questions.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, thank you so much for this thought-provoking and intuitive presentation, which touches upon all the aspects of ethics and research. Your presentation was definitely very subjective and informative. Now, I would like to ask the participants, if you have any questions, you can one by one put them up, and we will be more than happy to have taken up your questions. Dear participants, the house is now open for discussion. So if you have any questions, kindly put it forward.
Somebody has raised a hand.
Okay, I can see that. Amarjyoti Bharali sir, you have raised a hand. Please kindly put your question. Amarjyoti Bharali sir, I can see you have raised your hand. Kindly put your question.
I think he has raised his by mistake.
Okay. So other participants, if you have any questions, please put it forward.
No question?
Yeah, I think there is none, ma'am.
There are no questions. So just briefly, something that I thought I would touch upon and I didn't.
Definitely, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Time. So I mentioned that today we do multi and interdisciplinary research. I think a whole host of new questions have been raised by this. One is that when you do work with other people, your responsibility to the discipline of that other person. Say I'm collaborating on migration studies with some 5 disciplines. I look at the literatures, I have somebody from history, someone from economics, somebody from political science, maybe someone from psychology, right? So we have these 5 disciplines working together. We could all do separate work, all produce one part of the work and have a multidisciplinary kind of engagement. But more and more, and the NEP has actually flagged multi-trans, interdisciplinarity all through the document. So I think it's very important that we understand when we are talking about interdisciplinarity, what exactly are we doing? I edit a journal from GUINEIS. It's called the GUINEIS Journal. You're welcome to send papers there. But what we have said there is that, when we take papers for an area like Northeast India, so we cannot study Northeast India with one discipline. You could study the one part of it maybe within a discipline, which has been happening for a long time. But now more and more what we are looking at is that how do we study this entity, which is called Northeast, as individual states and as an entity, as a common entity. So in our latest call for papers, we have said that we will only accept papers which are interdisciplinary and can clearly show the engagement of at least two disciplines. So there could be a historical component. Most papers have a historical component without awareness that there is one. So a historical component, but also perhaps engagement amongst economics, politics, psychology. All of these could well come together in studying various aspects of the Northeast, which could be of people, the livelihood, labor, all kinds of things could be studied. So the question which has been sort of plaguing me for a while is, when we are studying something together with other disciplines, what is the relationship that I have with these other disciplines? How do I work with 5 other or 4 other disciplines? Is it okay if I let them do their work and I do mine? Or do I not also need to know how does that other discipline work? Right? So that's the first question in interdisciplinary research. And I'm raising this in this ethics workshop because I think this is also an ethical issue. It's all very well, to live and let live. But if I don't know another, if I don't make the effort to know another, and I let them do what they want, you can imagine what that research paper would be like. It would have separate components, and that would read very badly as the first consideration, if we take that as the first consideration. So what is the relationship then that we can establish amongst disciplines? Suppose I use literary text in order to read a historical event, an event which has had huge political dimensions and has also affected the economy of a country. See, 4 different things. They are all connected. So my relationship to the discipline of history, to economics, to political science will come alive only if I acquaint myself with how each of these disciplines functions. At least I need a working knowledge of these other disciplines. I need to know, what is capitalism? Is it a capitalist form that has come about as a result of a political event in a particular country? So many questions will come up then. So how does a discipline work with another then? It critically engages with other disciplines. We can enmesh these disciplines, bring them together and produce a knowledge of that particular time, place, say, of the Northeast or of the environment or of migration. And you'll notice another very interesting thing in all this research, that when we are talking about interdisciplinarity, a single subject doesn't lend itself to interdisciplinarity in the same way as an area does. So if you're doing climate change or environmental issues being studied, we'll see that it is possible to use the knowledge from various disciplines. In fact, it is imperative to use the knowledge from various disciplines. So an area that we study, and therefore the importance and the attention to the new areas that are emerging, new areas of research that are emerging. You can no longer stay within your discipline and say, no, I'll just look at this literary text, or I'll just look at this aspect that is basic to my discipline, and I won't bother about anything else. You can't, because an economic issue might have political dimensions, historical dimensions. How do you deal with that? It might have psychological dimensions. Right? It could have geographical, geological, and so many other dimensions. So how do you deal with all this? So this is the point I wanted to, put on board, that when we are doing interdisciplinary, it's also important to keep in mind as you go through all this work, that you keep in mind what exactly happens in interdisciplinary research. When you're writing a paper with someone, two people writing a paper using maybe from geography and economics, those two people, how are they going to communicate their research together to a particular journal? How do they demarcate their work? But how does one discipline also not only speak to another, but also critiques another, right? So this is what we also need to have in mind, because you'll see most journals nowadays will demand interdisciplinary papers. Many important journals now work with interdisciplinary kind of areas. So it's important to keep that in mind. I thought I would just add that as part of what I had to say today. So thank you, Kasturi.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So once again, the house is open for discussion. If you have any questions, kindly ask. And if you have none, then we will conclude today's session. So may I conclude the session, dear participants?
I think you can. Nobody has any questions.
Yeah.
I suppose my discipline itself is a little alien, so my interests don't speak that much to your audience.
No, ma'am, it is very informative, I think. So anyways, ma'am, your presentation was really very informative, and we have definitely learned from your presentation what ethics is in practice of a discipline, and what does ethics to self and the other matter of research field it means, or what are the ethical practices that are unique to each discipline. And we also touched upon why we should know the culture of a discipline and its origin, and what are the changes we are dealing with in terms of ethics in the disciplines. We also learned why referencing should be our second nature, and what is the importance of ethical training and why it is an emerging issue currently. I'm honored to have moderated this session, and I'm sure that the participants today have got a lot of information and inspiration from you. So as the session comes to an end, I would like to thank you, ma'am, for allowing us to listen to you and accepting our invitation. I sincerely hope that, ma'am, you can guide us in our future endeavors, and we will benefit from your vast experience. I would also like to thank our principal, Dr. Prasanna Dutta sir, for his constant support and guidance. I'd also take this opportunity to thank Dr. Rafiq Ahmed sir, head of the Department of Economics, for always encouraging us to do the best for our department. I'd also like to thank my colleagues, Dr. Mainomani Saikia ma'am and Dr. Rima Rabha, for the constant support and also allowing me this opportunity to conduct this inaugural session. I would like to thank Dr. Pankaj sir, IQAC coordinator, for his constant guidance and support throughout the planning and execution of this workshop. And most importantly, our librarian, Dr. Anupam Chanda sir, for his technical support right from the moment the idea for this workshop was conceived. And last but not the least, dear participants, I would like to thank you. Without you, this workshop has not been possible. With this, I would want to say that we are coming to the closing of our inaugural session, but I have an announcement for the participants. We will be sharing a feedback link for all the session, and there will be a separate session code for all the sessions. The session code for the inaugural session is DOVE. I repeat, it's DOVE, DOVE. While you're giving your feedback, kindly use this session code. Thank you.
Thank you, Kasturi.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Participants may leave the session and you will again join the session at 12:20 p.m. With the same link. You may join the second session with the same link at 12:20.
Can I ask something?
Yeah, of course, ma'am.
What we have to do with the code, which you just told?
Ma'am, we will be sharing a feedback link. So when we are giving your feedback for this session, inaugural session, then you have to just put that code, and the code is DOVE.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. We will be seeing at 12:20.